Akwe ni tompak, giwise inini natasuis, turupas nicha shayawonk, Unkechaug mide inini nichipayonk, uspatak nitak. Greetings, my friends and relatives. My name is Harry Wallace. I'm the elected chief of the Unkechaug Indian Nation, giwise inini in my language, which means hunter man. I'm a Turtle Clan, and I live here on Puspatuk territory, Unkechaug territory, Puspatuk Reservation. Today, we had a rather historic meeting with the representatives from the National Park Service, the superintendent of the Fire Island National Park Service, and the representatives from the William Floyd estate, which is considered part of the National Park Service, in an effort to repatriate human remains that were removed from the William Floyd estate in 1912 and placed in the American Museum of Natural History.
I'm Susan Sarna. So it's nice to all meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Harry Wallace.
Yes, nice to meet you on person. So Susan Sarna. Oh, you've been on a phone call, yes. Right? Yes. Nice to meet you.
And we actually walked the land in an attempt to locate a suitable place for repatriation of approximately 12 bodies that were dug up 100 years ago. Since these 12 remains were removed from the lands currently occupied by the William Floyd estate, we spoke with them about returning them to that location. The representatives of the National Park Service, which controls the William Floyd estate because it's part of the Fire Island National Seashore, they agreed that it would be appropriate to restore them to that site.
Who was here years and years ago when they came upon the bones in the attic at the house. And I was like, what was Chris thinking? Chris was the curator at the time.
Yeah.
And they said that they weren't sure what to do. And that's why he thought...
So they did the wrong thing instead of asking somebody.
Yeah, you're right. And they thought, well, because the family did it, and that's where the others were, they thought it should all be in one place. Mm-hmm. In retrospect, at least it is in one place and has been safe. Mm. That's the only thing we have as a positive out of this.
In retrospect, they ignored us completely.
Hey, they put it in an attic. Never, thank goodness they found it at least, and we could move, and it's all together and we can move forward. Not that it's any excuse, but, sometimes I always say that at least museums keep objects safe.
I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but desecrating remains and putting them in a box in an attic is not what I consider safe.
No, well, but that's what the family did. Yeah. I'm shocked that the family did that.
Characterization, to me, would be an inappropriate description of what was done. And usually, one thing is, yes, I can understand in 1912 the form of desecration, but in 2005, when you found that box, when the museum, the estate people found that box, and to ignore us at that time,
right,
was
that was the misjustice.
Was an injustice. I think what was happening was they contacted the personnel from the Museum of the American Indian, which was at the time the Hay Foundation, and they dug up the bones. They obviously removed any of the artifacts that were found there because all we have, when we went to the National Museum of American History where the remains have been stored, there were no funerary objects there with them.
Wait a minute, so I didn't know that. You think that there were objects with it?
We always bury people.
Oh my goodness. That's crushing.
Well, repatriation is, for us, is a return of our people back into this burial from whence they came. They should never have been dug up in the first place. So we have a concept that we call archaeological sovereignty, and that is that those people who are buried should remain buried. They've given the respect of honoring a sacred place where the remains were stored. We don't dig up anybody's remains, whether they're native or non-native, but we especially are insulted by the amount of human remains and funerary objects that are stored in museums across North America. And we established a number of years ago an organization called the Long Island Intertribal Historic Preservation Task Force, whose mission was to reclaim and repatriate those remains that have been removed from our ancestral territory. It has since grown into a better or more organized effort known as the Honor Our Indigenous Ancestors, Inc., which is a number of different Long Island Native tribes, Native representatives from different tribal organizations. The Unkechaug, the Shinnecock, the Montaukett, the Matinecock, the Sitauket, as well as some representatives from the other New England area. And our sole purpose and mission is to not only educate people about the wrongs that were done, but to restore those bodies that were unlawfully and improperly removed from their sacred burial places, and restore them as much as possible to the original burial places or something appropriately sacred. So the original remains were sent into the American Museum of Natural History in 1912, along with whatever funerary objects that were dug from there. Then in 2005, they found a box of additional remains at the William Floyd estate, and they sent those to the American Museum of Natural History as well. And that's how we found out about it, because they had an obligation to notify us before they removed them. So when they did the removal, they realized that they had made a mistake. They didn't notify us in the beginning, and then they notified us after the fact. And so began a long journey for restoration and repatriation of these remains, which began in 2005 for me, but and it's what, 17 years later. We did go to the American Museum of Natural History a few years ago, pre-COVID. Canoe Benton, you went with me, and we covered those remains, and we wrapped them in red cloth. We said prayers over them. We said prayer songs over them. We smudged them, and we wrapped them up in preparation for reburial. Now is the time for us to complete that process. The Park Service, in more recent years, first the Park Service realized the mistake that they made and didn't know how to correct it. So what we did was we showed them the way that this is how you correct a mistake. In more recent years, they have been cooperative in telling the story of the relationship between the Unkechaug people and the colonial people in this area, which is considerable historic interest to colonial America. William Floyd was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and it is his home that the remains will be reinterred. William Smith is one of the original settlers in this area, and his descendants were representatives of the New York State and the federal government. As one of his grandson was a United States Senator. There's a number of different representatives, state representatives in his family. They are also a part of the restoration of the human remains in this area. it has been said to me that the National Park Service wants to broaden its historical story.
So, Lindsey, I did explain to the group that one of the things the National Park Service is concentrating on right now is our interpretation of this site and using the land in a better manner and updating it, and how we have reports written now that are going to guide us to our future. That we're not just going to talk about the Floyds, we're hoping to bring in the story of everybody that's been on this property at one point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and really shifting the visitor experience away from the house to connecting with the landscape and the environment and understanding the importance that this land has had in history for many different voices and how it's contributed to the history on Long Island, that sort of thing. So Julie actually is here in part because she's someone we brought in this year to help us build out those stories, build out different experiences.
You know, we want to make sure that we're sharing your story sensitive.
Well, we just corrected the original origin story, so
Okay.
Which
we'll
is-
be more than happy to correct your story. Quite often when we receive human remains for repatriation, in fact, almost universally, all that we receive are the actual bodies. And there are very few funerary objects. But we know, because we know our ceremony, that when we bury our people, we bury them with quite a bit of funerary objects, especially in particular to the individual and into the spiritual way in which they lived. First of all burials people have clothing. You would call them regalia today, but then they would call them clothes because they were buried with their clothes that were associated with human burial. They would also be buried with articles, personal items that they wanted to take with them. That could be medallions, it could be beadwork, it could be a number of different things. And they would also be buried with some spiritual items, which could be a pipe, could be some tools and food that would be a bundle, sacred bundles that would be included in the burial. We know this to be true because we do it today in the same way. So all of these things would have been interred with the body itself. And when you have 12 bodies there, that would be a considerable amount of funerary objects. I believe the last time we went to the Museum of American Museum of Natural History, we wrapped 18 or 19 remnants of human remains from the Shinnecock territory, and there were very little funerary objects that were a part of that reburial. So we know that they've separated those items from the actual remains themselves. And quite often they pretend ignorance, that they don't know what happened to them. So it is an ongoing struggle to bring to a conclusion everything that was taken from the grave, because those funerary objects are very valuable in the non-native world, monetarily valuable. To us, they're spiritual value. But to them, it's monetary value. And we want to return all those items to show the true respect that they need, that is deserving of those that were taken. I've seen in museums items that we know that are burial items there. Moccasins that are beaded on both ends, on the bottom. It's not intended to be walked on. Pipes that are ceremonial. Bundles, sacred bundles that we know we bury our dead with, that don't belong, in a museum. all of these things you see there, you know that they are not intended for public display, but you see them there. We have the golf course at Huntington and what they call Indian Hills, which we're known native remains that have been known to be there. It's a known fact that they were there. And we're trying to stop that golf course from desecrating any more bodies. We've asked the State Park Service and the State Historical Preservation Office to stop them from doing any more construction. And they have limited ability to do that because New York State does not have a unmarked burial preservation law. It's one of 3 states that don't have that. So we have legislation pending in the state. It's called the Unmarked Burial Protection Act that we're trying to get passed in order to prevent further desecration of human remains. I find it difficult for people to understand or to allow that kind of activity to go on, but it's happening. And we're trying to move legislation ahead to prevent any desecration of any remains, whether native or non-native, in the state of New York. It's surprising that they don't have an unmarked burial law. The second thing is that there are a number of sites. We've already buried over 200 people in the last 3-4 years, and there are a number of burials that are going to continue in the coming months. There's the one out east with the Shinnecock at their golf course, which I understand 19 bodies will be reinterred there. So there is an ongoing process of reburial. We know that the various museum entities, there are about 5,000 potential sources of human remains and funerary objects. That is an astronomical number. That is an unbelievably huge number. There was a movie I saw one time. It was called The Monuments Men. It was a story about, in World War II, a group of archivists and museum curator personnel who were tasked with restoring art that was stolen by Germany, by Nazi Germany. And the statement that was made, well, it's a rather well-known actors and so on, but the statement that was made, and the reason why I bring it up is because he made a statement. Said, if you can destroy a building, you can destroy a home. And you know what? They'll just rebuild. But if you take their culture, if you take away their what they respect as sacred in their culture, then it is as if they never existed at all. So when you take away our human remains and you take away those cultural and spiritual items that are part of our historical and cultural and spiritual way of life, then what you're trying to do is destroy us as a people. So it's not just a body. It's not just a piece of art. It's a destruction of a way of life. And when you do that, then you are threatening an entire people, entire community, entire nation, entire way of life. And that is what's insulting and obnoxious in its intent. From the beginning, from the outset, it's been the approach that the colonists took, and it's the approach that America has taken throughout its history. And we're trying to change that. And we're tasked with that mission. The first thing is to understand is that we have never had a reburial ceremony because we have never had to rebury our dead. When we place them in the ground, and the idea is that they are to take their journey, we're never to disturb those grounds ever. But we've had to develop a reburial ceremony in order to reflect or to speak about what was done and what we are here to do. So when you see the reburial ceremony, to us, what we have done is that we have added an element of the reburial ceremony that apologizes for the things that we're about to do because we've never done it before. And so we've had to ask for forgiveness for the wrong that was done, not only by those who did the wrong, but by us who were unable to prevent the wrong from being done. So this is a part of the ceremony that is very, very hard, very hard. And if you've ever had to experience anything like this, you know how difficult that is to do. And it is emotionally very draining for us as people to be able to say, forgive me for not protecting you. That's a hard thing to happen. And it is a way in which we're able to communicate to spirit that this is what we're trying to do now. So those ceremonies are very private. We don't record them, display them, advertise them, because of how deep and how difficult it is to do. Our work is unbelievably huge and overwhelming at times, but we continue to do that. So that's what's in our future, and so long as I'm able to be able to move about and deal with these things, I will continue to do that, regardless of what I do, in my normal course of day. I will continue to be a part of this effort to restore these remains to their respectful place.